Alright, so we got our jets changed out on our single carb, and this is with the uneven runner intake. And so now I'm doing a little bit of tuning. I didn't get it perfect, but try to get it close enough that I can keep my air fuel mixes within range. But I ended up with a 60 on the idle, from a 41 to a 60, and then I went from a 122 to about a 155. So a whole lot more fuel coming through there, and I'm able to run it off choke now. So we got everything set up. So now when I fire it up, after the O2 sensors come on, you're going to see, first off, there's an imbalance on the air fuel mix. So one of the cylinders is going to be running leaner than the other, but I'm trying to keep it in range so I can do the testing on it. But first thing right off the bat with this uneven runner, we see the air fuel mix is not controlled anymore. So it'll run. It's quite a bit noisier than it was with the dual carbs because it's pulling more air and fuel. But because we got a unequal runner on here, I don't know yet. We'll find out when we put the equal runners on, but that may be what's causing this imbalance. But my vacuum gauges look good. Everything looks good on it, so it looks like it's all set up. We don't have any leaks or anything, so we'll fire it up and see what it sounds like, and then we'll try to do our torque test and then also our running test to see how much fuel consumption we got. So let's fire it up real quick and just see what it sounds like. Quite a bit louder. We'll let those sensors turn on here and we'll zoom down to it. Alright, so the first thing we notice about the unequal runner one is that it throws the air fuel mix off, but it does run. It's a lot noisier, and you can see that we had to keep one right up at the top, but the other one is rich. So my rear cylinder is running really rich. My front cylinder is running pretty lean. It's up in the 14s. But it's good enough that we can do some testing, and with the bigger jet, it should richen up when I'm running it up on throttle, so I'm probably going to have a little more fuel consumption, but I'm not at risk of messing up my motor by running it too lean when I throttle it up. So let's get set up here with the cameras, and we'll do our test on torque, and then we'll do our running test at 3,000 RPMs and see just how much different the fuel consumption is. Alright, so for our torque test on our unequal runner with the single carb, we're going to fire it up. I'll put it up in 4th gear, take it to 3,000, and then take it to 3,500 again. So then we're going to see what it does on pulling those RPMs down under load. So we got everything set up. We got our fuel on, so let's fire him up. Alright, so for that test you can see on the RPMs, because we had to jet our carburetor, bigger, then we do have definitely more torque on the bottom end. So you can see at 3,000 when I hit it, it dropped down just a little bit and then it came back. So I'll have to look on the camera to see what it was. But at 3,500 it dropped down to about 3. So much stronger, like we all note, that when you're running the single carb with the manifold, or you're running dual carbs that have air intakes, you're going to get more torque on the bottom end. Alright, so we're ready for our running test. So we got our little camera here so we can watch the air fuel, and we're going to run another 100 milliliters out of this thing, so we got to get it set up. I'll hit the timer and we'll time the fuel consumption. Alright, so there we go. We got our fuel consumption, and this one took 1 minute and 28 seconds to pull down a 100 milliliters, so definitely less fuel economical, but everything looked pretty good. We stayed in range, our air fuel was reasonably close, so I think we're ready to switch out for our equal runner one, and let's get our final comparison. Alright, well, we got our equal runner manifold on here now. It's the stainless one, and so it's all set up, and I already did some test runs on it because the jetting, that 155 or so that I had on that other single carb intake, was a little too big, and I ended up having to take it down to about a 145, somewhere around in there, because I was just so rich on the rear cylinder that it wouldn't even fire. So we got it all set up and everything, but what's interesting is that the equal length runner one here actually imbalances the air fuel mix for the front and the back cylinders even worse. And so it's a point that it's well above 14 when I can get the back cylinder to come on at like 11 or 12 or something like that. So there's something going on with these manifolds that drive the air fuel mix ratios between these cylinders, and I really don't know why it would be different, other than maybe it's camming or something in this motor. This is a little bit older motor, so maybe the cylinders are a little bit different from one another. You know, by now maybe the rear cylinder is a little stronger, the front cylinder is a little weaker. But it definitely makes a difference, because with the dual carbs, you can adjust to compensate for each cylinder's differences. With this single carb, I can't make any adjustment. It just kind of is what it is, other than the main jetting to get one of the two in so it'll run, or get them both in close enough that they'll both run. So let's put the camera down and we'll fire it up, and you can see that it does start up and it runs. It's actually a little quieter than that other manifold, but the front cylinder is so lean that it's not coming on all the time. So we're not getting a full combustion, and it's hitting about every other. So let's get this camera down, and we'll turn our little camera on so we can see our gauges, and we'll see what this thing is doing. Alright, so let's fire this thing up with the equal runner one, and let's see what it's doing on its air fuel. Because I was surprised. I thought that it would go the opposite way, and it would make the air fuel mix closer to each other, but it turns out it makes them further away. So we'll fire it up here and see. So, unfortunately, because I'm too lean on my front, I don't want to risk messing up my motor here by running a long test on this thing and getting it either too hot or, tearing something up. So I'm not going to test the torque, and I'm not going to test the running consumption because I just don't want to mess my motor up. But we can see that the air fuel mix has gotten even worse for an equal length runner. So, turns out that maybe this one that has such an unequal length to it, where this is the front and this is the rear, that maybe this is actually a benefit, because I could get this one to run. I didn't really like it. It used a lot of fuel. We'll calculate the fuel here at the end when we do our stats. But this one actually was able to run the motor much better than the equal length one. So the only thing we got left is, unless I take this one off, and I'm going to look at these gaskets and make sure that they're sealed up. If those aren't sealed up, then that'll be a problem that's causing my air fuel imbalance. But if I got a good mark from the cylinders all the way around on these gaskets right here, then we're able to confirm that there's no leaks in it, and it must be something to do with the runner length on these manifolds. But either way it goes, it's a whole lot easier to have an engine running good if you're running the duals than it is to run either of these, because it changes things so much on that air fuel mix. So we'll take this thing off, and we're going to check it and make sure my gaskets are sealed up. And if they are, then we're going to conclude the testing, and we'll do some finals here with what we learned from all of our testing. Alright, so let's pull this whole setup off here, and we're going to check and make sure our gaskets are good. So if I'm sealed up over here, then I'm just going to have to conclude that there's differences in the manifolds and how they affect the two cylinders, because you can't balance between the two. So let's get this thing took off here real quick. Alright, so we can see on our compression right here, we had good compression all the way around. You can see it marked it all the way top and bottom, so everything looks good there. So I don't see any issues with it why it would be leaking, because it's got compression. And on the rear, we pull that one off. It's got good seal as well. So we got compression all the way around on both of the gaskets. So there's really no reason why this one should be running lean on that front cylinder like it's doing, unless it's got something to do with the lengths of the runners. So that might answer why some folks have difficulties with these single carb manifolds and other folks run them fine, is because maybe the cylinders are a little bit different on the motor due to the age. One of them's worn more than the other or something like that. But anyway it goes, we can see that there's big differences between the dual carbs and a single carb manifold. So what we're going to do is put our duals back on and get our motor set up here again for testing for something else. But we'll finish up once we get all of our information, and I'll put it on my board over here and we can talk through it. Alright, so just a little added video here just to ensure that nothing's wrong with the motor over the course of testing. So here's the equal runner, and here's this one, and my dual carbs are back on. So as you can see, if we fire it up, another O2 sensors come back up. We're running our dual carbs. I didn't adjust them, I just took them off to do the single carb testing. So give it just a second, I'll zoom down here and we'll look at our oxygen sensors. We can see we're right back where we started. That was the original adjustment for these, and throttle's up fine. So there we go. So that kind of confirms that there's nothing going on with the test rig. It was all about these manifolds. As soon as I put my duals back on, things went right back to normal. So much easier to tune in the duals than it is these single carbs. They're a little more painful to get on and off, but by far they make the motor run better. So let's get set up, calculate our data, and see what we got for some results for this testing. Alright, so for the results side of this whole thing, we can see some comparisons. And if we look, I don't know if you can read it too well on the board, but this is the single carb setup, the unequal. I wasn't able to test the equal runner one. I got a few notes down here about that. But if you look in comparison, the first one is the fuel usage. So because I was running 3,000 RPMs in second gear, I can estimate that that's about 25 miles per hour. Doesn't really matter if I'm that close, but what matters is the differences. So you can see on a dual carb, because I can adjust those carbs independently, I can get in second gear 3,000 RPMs under load, I can get about 35 miles per gallon. If I run the single with the unequal runners, although it ran and we were able to run things, it had more power, but you can see a tremendous drop in my miles per gallon that I would get out of that. Now, it wasn't set up perfect. I just got it running good enough that I could do the testing and I wasn't too lean, I wasn't too rich. So you get somewhere around that. You probably get a little bit better, but you can see there's a big difference between the two simply because you can't adjust those two carburetors independently. So then if we go down to the one we know, this is the make you feel happy when you go to a single carb. This was the torque test. So you can see at 3,000 RPMs, the free speed at 3,000, the motor dropped down for the single, it only dropped down to 2850, right around there. I was a little off on my holding the RPM, but it was about 2850. But for the dual carb, you can see it dropped down much lower, about 2,500. So there is more torque on that single carb, but I think it's mainly due to the rejetting and not due to the manifold, because we saw the same here. If we had our free speed running at 3,500 RPMs, we dropped down to about 33, but with the dual carb, it dropped down to 28. So there is more power there. So that is confirmed. So I got a little box around that to confirm which one is which. As far as the air-fuel ratio, I was able to dial it in, do some jetting. I went up with my jetting around 155, something like that, to try to get them to where they were balanced. But you could see on the single, I got a little bit of imbalance. I'm at 13.3 versus 11.1 on the rear. The rear cylinder seems to be the cylinder that always wants to stay rich, regardless of what we're doing. On my dual carb, when I just dialed it in and got it set up, I was at 12.3 and 11.2, but the reason why this one wins is because this is adjustable. I can go in there and fine-tune each carburetor. I can make those perfectly match. I could go higher or lower. Over here, I'm kind of stuck with this imbalance. If I increase one, it's going to increase the other. So that's not a good thing on the single carb. The dual carb wins definitely on that. As far as the exhaust temps, I wasn't really hot either way. You could see a little bit of a difference on the rear. For some reason, I was a little bit hotter on the single than I was on the dual. Not really sure why, because the air fuel mix was about the same. I don't know if it was because of the load or because of an imbalance, or maybe it was a little bit leaner, but it wasn't showing up on the gauge. So either way, that's not too bad. We're not running super high temperatures. And then the vacuum, we could see that even for every test, including the equal runners, the vacuum balanced. So there wasn't an issue with the balance of the vacuum in the manifold. It's more of an issue of which cylinder is wanting to take the fuel and which cylinder is not getting as much fuel in its mix ratio. So then, right at the bottom down here, the real quick that we did on the equal runner one, what I found is that the manifold, it makes a big difference on what that manifold looks like. I actually thought that the equal runner one was going to do better than the unequal, but turns out when you equalize the runners, the rear cylinder scavenges even more because the front cylinder is further away from the carburetor, and so it ends up with a massive air-fuel ratio imbalance to the point that I didn't want to test it because I was afraid I would overheat my motor running up with that lean. I was up in the 20s, you know, down to about 15 is the best I could get it. If I tried to rejet and go a little bit bigger, the rear cylinder got so rich that it wouldn't even fire. So there wasn't a way that I could balance between the two. So I didn't do the testing on that. It wouldn't have done any good. We got a few things that are variables we don't know, but the bottom line is when it comes down to a single carb versus a dual carb, number one, make sure if you're switching over to a single carb that you look at the manifolds, see that the manifold has been used somewhere and they've had good results out of it. Number two, check your motor, make sure that your compression is good, you know, your valves are seating good, you don't have any issues with anything like that, because that's going to really throw them off. You can't adjust for it anymore because you don't have dual carburetors. And then finally, when you run it, you probably don't want to use one of these old first-gen carburetors because these don't have pumpers, you know, they don't have anything on them, they're just stock. And I did that just so I could compare carb to carb, but you're probably going to have to upgrade to a better carburetor and not try to use one of these stock carbs. So there we go. There's our test results, and we can see that for me, I'm sticking with what I've always done is I'll run dual carburetors. Now I can put air pods on my carburetors and I can get that bottom end torque out of the duals, but I still have to do the sync and I still have to do all of that, and they're still hard to get off. But I don't mind that because what I get out of it is the performance, and even as my motors age, I can still adjust my carburetors and get everybody lined back up. Well, alrighty, there's the results of a big old long test, and the motor rig gets stored away for a little while until we find something else to do with it. Alrighty, well, thanks for watching.